Ghost Adventures has investigated some of the most dangerous and disturbing locations in the world: demon houses, former execution sites, asylums where patients were subjected to treatment so brutal that the buildings themselves seemed to carry the weight of what happened inside them, locations so saturated with violent and traumatic history that crew members have been physically attacked, psychologically broken, and in documented cases hospitalized during the lockdown itself. In more than 20 seasons of television, the Ghost Adventures crew has faced things that most people cannot bring themselves to believe are real. And through every one of those investigations, in every one of those locations, no matter what the building contained or what it produced when the lights went out, Goodwin showed up. He was afraid, genuinely and visibly afraid, in the way that made millions of viewers trust him completely because his fear was never performed and never minimized. And he showed up anyway, every single time, because that was who he was and what he had committed to. That changed during the filming of what sources close to the production have described as the most volatile and most dangerous investigation Ghost Adventures has attempted in recent memory. The location was a private property with a history of violence, occult activity, and documented paranormal phenomena that had driven multiple previous occupants out within weeks of taking possession. Local investigators who had attempted to document the property before the Ghost Adventures crew arrived described something inside the building that went beyond residual haunting or even intelligent haunting in the conventional sense. They described an active and hostile presence that seemed aware of visitors before they arrived, that responded to investigation attempts with escalating aggression, and that had left at least 2 previous investigators requiring psychological support after attempting extended contact. Zak Bagans had been pursuing access to this location for years. When access was finally granted, he moved quickly, assembling the crew and arriving at the property before a full safety evaluation had been completed, before certain protocols that the crew had established over years of operating in dangerous locations had been formally reviewed and confirmed. Aaron raised concerns before the lockdown even began. People with direct knowledge of the production say he expressed serious reservations about the preparation timeline, about the specific tactics Zak was intending to employ once the doors were sealed, and about one element of what Zak had planned that Aaron believed crossed into territory the crew had never entered before and had good reason not to enter. Zak pushed forward regardless, and what unfolded over the following hours inside that property ended a partnership that had survived everything the paranormal world had been able to throw at it across 2 full decades of operating at the extreme edge of what paranormal investigation television is willing to attempt. Ghost Adventures has investigated some of the most dangerous and disturbing locations in the world: demon houses, former execution sites, asylums where patients were subjected to treatment so brutal that the buildings themselves seemed to carry the weight of what happened inside them, locations so saturated with violent and traumatic history that crew members have been physically attacked, psychologically broken, and in documented cases hospitalized during the lockdown itself. In more than 20 seasons of television, the Ghost Adventures crew has faced things that most people cannot bring themselves to believe are real, and through every one of those investigations, in every one of those locations, no matter what the building contained or what it produced when the lights went out, Goodwin showed up. He was afraid, genuinely and visibly afraid, in the way that made millions of viewers trust him completely because his fear was never performed and never minimized, and he showed up anyway, every single time, because that was who he was and what he had committed to. That changed during the filming of what sources close to the production have described as the most volatile and most dangerous investigation Ghost Adventures has attempted in recent memory. The location was a private property with a history of violence, occult activity, and documented paranormal phenomena that had driven multiple previous occupants out within weeks of taking possession. Local investigators who had attempted to document the property before the Ghost Adventures crew arrived described something inside the building that went beyond residual haunting, or even intelligent haunting in the conventional sense. They described an active and hostile presence that seemed aware of visitors before they arrived, that responded to investigation attempts with escalating aggression, and that had left at least 2 previous investigators requiring psychological support after attempting extended contact. Zak Bagans had been pursuing access to this location for years. When access was finally granted, he moved quickly, assembling the crew and arriving at the property before a full safety evaluation had been completed, before certain protocols that the crew had established over years of operating in dangerous locations had been formally reviewed and confirmed. Aaron raised concerns before the lockdown even began. People with direct knowledge of the production say he expressed serious reservations about the preparation timeline, about the specific tactics Zak was intending to employ once the doors were sealed, and about one element of what Zak had planned that Aaron believed crossed into territory the crew had never entered before and had good reason not to enter. Zak pushed forward regardless, and what unfolded over the following hours inside that property ended a partnership that had survived everything the paranormal world had been able to throw at it across 2 full decades of operating at the extreme edge of what paranormal investigation television is willing to attempt. The accounts of what specifically occurred during the investigation that broke Aaron Goodwin's 20-year commitment to ghost adventures are careful in their details, and that carefulness is itself one of the most revealing things about the situation. The people with direct knowledge of what happened are not speaking freely or fully, and the ones who are speaking at all are doing so in terms that protect their continued access to the production and their relationships with the people involved, while still communicating clearly that what occurred was genuinely serious in a way that goes beyond the ordinary conflicts and tensions that arise within any long-running television production. What has been established across multiple accounts from people with direct knowledge of the investigation is that at a specific point during the lockdown, Zak Bagans made a decision to pursue a form of engagement with whatever presence was in that location that represented a significant and deliberate escalation beyond anything the crew had agreed to before entering the building. Not an escalation in the sense that Ghost Adventures routinely escalates, through provocation, through extended exposure, through challenging whatever entity might be present to make itself known in ways that produce compelling television. This was different in kind and not merely in degree. Sources who were present or who have direct knowledge of what occurred describe Zak crossing into a category of engagement that the crew had discussed collectively over years of working together, and that had been understood, without necessarily being written into any formal protocol, as a line that would not be crossed regardless of what an investigation produced or how compelling the evidence on the other side of that line might be. Aaron's objection when Zak moved toward that line was immediate. It was not quiet. It was not something that could be absorbed into the momentum of the investigation and addressed during a break or after the lockdown ended. He made his position clear on camera in the moment with a directness that people who have reviewed the footage describe as unlike anything previously captured during a Ghost Adventures lockdown in terms of how unambiguous and how serious the exchange was between these two men. Zak did not stop. That is the part that the people close to this situation return to when they describe what happened, because it is the part that explains everything that followed. Aaron drew a line in terms that could not have been misunderstood, and Zak Bagans, who had stood next to Aaron Goodwin in the dark for 20 years, who knew better than almost anyone alive what Aaron's limits actually were, and how rarely he reached them, chose to continue. And Aaron Goodwin, who had never in 2 decades of the most extreme paranormal investigation television has ever produced, walked away from a lockdown, walked away. Understanding why Aaron Goodwin's departure carries the weight it does requires understanding not just what happened during the investigation that ended things, but why he stayed as long as he did, in a dynamic that the people who know it best describe as having never been simple or uncomplicated or without its private costs. Ghost Adventures is not, and has never been, simply a group of friends doing work they love in places that frighten them. It is a production built around the creative vision and the dominant personality of Zak Bagans, and operating within that production, particularly as one of its original members with a long personal history with Zak, has always involved absorbing things that did not make the final edit. Nick Groff was the first original member to reach his limit. His departure after season 10 was handled publicly in terms that emphasized creative differences and new directions, but the accounts of people who were close to the situation at the time describe something more fraught and more personal than that framing suggests. Nick has spoken in interviews in the years since his departure in terms that indicate the end of his time on Ghost Adventures was not entirely amicable, and that the circumstances of his exit left marks that took time to work through. Aaron was there for all of it. He watched Nick leave. He remained. He remained through the changes in the show's format and tone that followed Nick's departure. He remained through the evolution of Zak's creative ambitions in directions that placed increasing demands on the people around him, and that did not always account for the human cost of those demands on a crew that was being asked to go further into more dangerous territory with each passing season. He remained through investigations that affected him in ways he has spoken about publicly and in ways he has never spoken about publicly, but that the people closest to him are aware of. The reasons Aaron stayed as long as he did are not difficult to identify for the people who know him. His loyalty runs deep to the work, to the show's audience, and to a friendship with Zak Bagans that, for all its complications, was real and had been built over a period of time and through a set of shared experiences that very few people on Earth can claim to have had alongside someone else. Aaron is also not a person who makes permanent decisions lightly. He is not someone who exits things because a situation is difficult or uncomfortable or personally costly, because if those were his thresholds, he would have left Ghost Adventures long before this investigation. He stayed because he believed in what the show was doing, and because he believed until the moment that belief was no longer available to him, that the partnership at the center of it was worth the cost of maintaining it. What Zak Bagans did during that investigation did not just make Aaron angry. It made the belief that had kept him in that building for 20 years, through everything the paranormal world had produced, and everything the dynamic with Zak had required of him, impossible to hold on to. And without that belief, there was nothing left to keep him there. The first indication that something serious had fractured within the Ghost Adventures crew did not arrive through an official statement or a prepared announcement. It arrived the way genuinely significant ruptures in long-running public partnerships almost always arrive in the age of social media, through absence, through silence, through the specific and unmistakable texture of what is not being said by people who are normally consistent and visible in their public communication. The people who follow Aaron Goodwin closely enough to have a calibrated sense of his normal patterns of engagement noticed the shift before any information became available through other channels. The references to upcoming Ghost Adventures content that had been a regular feature of his online presence became infrequent and then stopped entirely. His responses to fan questions about the show and about the crew shifted from the kind of enthusiastic engagement that had always characterized his relationship with the Ghost Adventures audience to something evasive and brief in a way that registered differently from ordinary promotional restraint. He stopped appearing in content associated with the production in ways that went beyond what could be explained by scheduling or by the normal rhythms of a show in production. Within the broader production community, information moved faster and with more specificity. People connected to the Ghost Adventures production, crew members, editors, individuals in the paranormal television space who maintain ongoing relationships with the people involved in the show, began describing a situation that was not a temporary disagreement or a contract dispute in the ordinary sense. The language being used in those circles was not the language of a hiatus or a negotiation. It was the language of something that had broken in a way that the people closest to it did not expect to see repaired through the normal mechanisms of professional reconciliation and mutual interest. When Aaron addressed the situation publicly, even in the partial and guarded terms that he has so far used, the response from the Ghost Adventures audience was immediate and significant and consistent in what it communicated about how the fan base understands the show's identity. The comments, the messages, the volume and the character of the reaction from people who have followed Ghost Adventures across 20 seasons made clear that the audience understands something that the production is going to have to reckon with directly. Aaron Goodwin is not a replaceable element of Ghost Adventures. He is not a cast member who fills a functional role that can be redistributed or substituted without fundamentally altering what the show is. He is the person who has been its emotional center since the beginning, and the response to the news of his departure demonstrated that the audience knows the difference between Ghost Adventures with Aaron Goodwin and whatever comes after him, and does not consider those two things to be the same show. What Zak Bagans did during that investigation did not happen without precedent or without warning signs that the people closest to the production had been watching accumulate for some time. Understanding the incident fully requires stepping back from the specific moment and looking at a pattern in Zak's behavior as both a producer and an investigator that has been developing across the show's run, and that has been visible to anyone paying close attention to how Ghost Adventures has changed over its 20-plus seasons on television. Zak Bagans is, by any honest assessment, one of the most driven and most creatively ambitious personalities that paranormal television has produced. That drive is the reason Ghost Adventures exists in the form it does. It is the reason the show has lasted as long as it has, reached the audience it has reached, and produced some of the most genuinely compelling paranormal investigation footage that has ever been captured on camera. Nobody who is honest about what Ghost Adventures is and what it has contributed to paranormal television can separate those contributions from the engine of Zak's ambition and his relentless pursuit of evidence that pushes past what other productions are willing to attempt. But that same drive has a cost, and the people who have been positioned closest to it have always been the ones paying the largest share of that cost. Former crew members who have spoken about their time on Ghost Adventures, both publicly and in private conversations, describe a consistent picture of a man whose pursuit of the result he is looking for does not always account for what it requires of the people around him. This is not a new observation, and it is not a secret within the paranormal television community. Zak himself has spoken, in interviews and on camera, about the psychological and physical toll that this work has taken on him personally. about experiences during investigations that he believes have left marks on him that have not fully healed. He is not unaware that the work is dangerous. He is not unaware of the cost, but awareness of a cost and consistently measuring it against what you are asking others to pay are two different things, and the gap between those two things is where the incident with Aaron Goodwin ultimately lives. The people close to the production describe a Zak Bagans who has become progressively more willing to push past the limits that the crew around him has established, not out of malice, but out of a conviction that the evidence on the other side of those limits is worth the risk of crossing them. That conviction, over time, has produced an investigator who is increasingly difficult to anchor to the boundaries that keep the people working alongside him safe. And during that investigation, it produced a moment that the closest partnership in Ghost Adventures history could not survive. The footage from the investigation has not been released, and the question of whether it will be released, in what form, and with what framing, is one that the production is navigating with considerable care and with an awareness that there is no version of that decision that does not carry significant consequences. But people who have seen the raw material from that night have described its contents in enough detail and with enough consistency across different accounts to build a picture of what the cameras captured during the hours that ended Aaron Goodwin's involvement with the show. And what that picture shows is more complicated and more significant than a simple argument between two people who had reached a breaking point. The footage of the investigation itself, prior to the moment of rupture between Aaron and Zak, is described by people who have reviewed it as some of the most active and most genuinely unsettling material Ghost Adventures has produced in recent seasons. The location was producing responses from the crew that were not performed and not constructed for the camera. Environmental anomalies and personal experiences that registered on the faces and in the bodies of people who have spent 20 years in haunted buildings and who know the difference between what a building produces when nothing is happening and what it produces when something is. The footage of the moment itself, the point at which Zak crossed the line Aaron had drawn and Aaron's response to that crossing, is described as something that exists in a different category from anything previously captured during a Ghost Adventures lockdown, not because of the paranormal content in the frame, though that element of the footage is described as significant and strange, but because of what it shows happening between two men who have been in the dark together for 20 years and who, in that moment, are no longer together in any sense that matters. Aaron's reaction on camera at the moment of rupture is described by everyone who has seen it in the same terms. It is not performed. It is not the reaction of someone playing a moment for the audience watching at home. It is the reaction of a person who has arrived at the end of something real, in real time, in a location that is already pushing everyone in it past the edges of what they are comfortable with, and who no longer has the resources to absorb what is being asked of him. Zak's response to Aaron in that moment is described as the other half of a picture that is deeply uncomfortable to watch, not because it reveals something monstrous, but because it reveals something recognizable about what happens to a person when the pursuit of a goal has become more important than the people standing next to them. The production's decision about what to do with that footage is still being made, and the difficulty of that decision is inseparable from the fact that the most important thing the footage documents is not paranormal at all. The practical question of what Ghost Adventures is and what it becomes without Aaron Goodwin is one that the production is now confronting in concrete terms, and the answers available to it are not encouraging for anyone who has followed the show across its full run and understands what Aaron's presence has actually meant to it. Ghost Adventures has operated without one of its founding members before. Nick Groff's departure after season 10 was managed through a combination of cast additions and format adjustments that kept the production running and kept its audience largely intact across the seasons that followed. The show continued, it remained compelling television, and the additions to the cast that came after Nick left brought new energy and new perspectives that served the production in genuine ways. But the comparison between Nick Groff's departure and Aaron Goodwin's departure has limits that are important to understand clearly, because treating them as equivalent misses something fundamental about what each of these men represented within the show's identity and within the audience's relationship to it. Nick Groff occupied a specific methodological role within the Ghost Adventures crew. He was the measured and precise investigator, the analytical counterweight to Zak's intensity, and while his contributions to the show were real and his absence was felt, The function he served could be approximated through other means and redistributed among other cast members without permanently altering what Ghost Adventures felt like to the people watching it. Aaron Goodwin's function within Ghost Adventures is not methodological. It is not a role that can be described in terms of what he does during an investigation in any technical sense, because what Aaron does is not primarily technical. What Aaron Goodwin has been for Ghost Adventures across 20 years is its emotional truth. He is the member of the crew through whom the audience has experienced fear honestly, the person whose genuine vulnerability has consistently validated the experiences of viewers who watch this show and find themselves genuinely affected by what it documents. He is the reason that Ghost Adventures has always felt like something real happening to real people rather than a performance staged for cameras in dark buildings. A Ghost Adventures without Aaron Goodwin can continue to investigate haunted locations. It can continue to capture paranormal evidence. It can continue to produce the confrontational and aggressive style of investigation that has defined the show's identity from the beginning. But it cannot replace the thing that Aaron Goodwin brought to it, because that thing was not a skill or a technique or a production function. It was a person, and the person is gone.